Do you involve your spouse in retirement planning reviews and overall financial discussions? According to a recent study done by Fidelity on couples and money, 53% of respondents disagreed on how much would be needed for retirement, and more than 1 in 4 were upset with their spouse not being involved in retirement planning decisions. Over the last 12 years, I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of families on their retirement planning. And today, I'm going to talk about 3 specific setbacks that I've seen couples face when planning for retirement. In addition, I'm going to outline the reasons why I feel that working with your spouse as a team when planning for retirement can achieve better outcomes. And although I think that each of these reasons could be enough motivation for you to work as a team with your spouse, be sure to stick around to the end where I'm going to speak about one key pillar that I think is most impactful. As we know, preparation can help to limit uncertainty, and that's exactly what we're going to be speaking about today. The first potential reason I feel like working with your spouse as a team is critical brings me back to my early childhood and teenage years. I used to love riding along in the car with my parents. Whether it was due to the alone time together, listening to music, or even just feeling the freedom of the wind coming through the windows. Being that my father was a mechanic growing up, I might have had a little more exposure to cars than others, and I absolutely loved it. Cars actually became one of my biggest interests over time. And this included anything from building my Pinewood Derby race cars with my father for Boy Scouts, to waiting for the newest release of Fast and the Furious movies. You probably could have considered me a motorhead at this point in my life. But I'll tell you what, despite all of those hours in and around cars throughout my entire life to that point, the first time my father threw me the keys and told me to drive, I was overwhelmed to say the least. One would think that my level of comfort being in and around cars would have made this an amazing moment in time. But number 1, it was completely unexpected. And number 2, it brought on a whole new level of responsibility that I had never had before. And that brings me to my first potential setback. And this occurs when the spouse that normally handles the finances is forced suddenly and unexpectedly to pass that responsibility to the other spouse that does not normally handle them. In many cases, we see firsthand that individuals tend to shy away and even try to avoid overall any change during retirement. With that, I would consider working as a team through your retirement planning to be critical to not only help potentially lower the uncertainty, but even maybe eliminate it altogether. Although I had spent countless amount of hours in and around cars throughout my life, I had no idea my father was going to throw me the keys at that point in time. Needless to say, I was a nervous wreck when I found out that I was going to be driving in a busy town for my first time at the wheel. Thank goodness it all worked out, but I can't stress enough the importance of working as a team through retirement planning to try to eliminate any uncertainties. If you'd like access to the guide that we use with our clients when working through the retirement planning process, feel free to click the link in the description. The second uncertainty you could face when retirement planning brings me to the famous story of Odysseus from Homer's The Odyssey. For those of you that don't know the story, Odysseus was the king of Ithaca, and he had to make a decades-long journey back home after the Trojan War. Odysseus prepared vigilantly for this trek, and thank goodness he did because he faced all sorts of obstacles and uncertainties along the way. Everything from feeling the wrath of the gods to facing and battling mystical creatures. Throughout the journey, Odysseus pushed not only himself, but also his crew to the limits both physically and mentally to overcome any obstacle that came in their way. Although nothing ever goes perfectly, and Odysseus and the crew lost some members along the way, they did largely prevail in the end. This brings me to uncertainty number 2, which we see all too often and many neglect to prepare for, and that is a loss of income due to a spouse's passing. In the event that something serious occurs that could alter or even stop cash flow, you need to have a full understanding of how your retirement plan works and what levers you can pull to make up for that shortfall. Resourcefulness can be powerful, especially in a tough situation, and that amplifies the need to work with your spouse when going through your retirement plan. The third situation I want to speak about is a real unfortunate story and kind of a head scratcher at that. You may be familiar with or have at least heard of the famous actor James Gandolfini, who played Tony Soprano in the hit series The Sopranos. Throughout his career, Gandolfini received recognition on multiple occasions, including a Golden Globe and 3 Emmy Awards. Unfortunately, at just 51 years old, Gandolfini passed away while traveling to Italy. As it's been said, there's potential for major tax consequences on his estate due to improper planning, which could potentially have been avoided had more care been taken prior. This brings me to my third setback, which we sometimes see spouses face and could be the most impactful. And that is not having a team of professionals around you while you're going through your planning in life. Constant communication and education can help you make overall better decisions when planning for retirement. Do you consistently review your retirement plan, your goals, and your asset allocation throughout the year? According to the 2024 Schwab Modern Wealth Survey, only 36% of Americans that responded have a financial plan in place. This number is staggering. Consider the potential positives that come along with having a plan in place and regularly reviewing it. Hey everyone, Gabe Galante here, fiduciary financial advisor, owner, and CEO at Rockline Wealth Management. And today, I'm going to talk to you about what I believe to be 10 crucial concepts to put in place during your financial planning process. In addition, although I think it would be useful to keep these tips at top of mind throughout the entire year, I'm going to break down for you and provide a roadmap as to where you might want to think, and these can be most impactful at different points in the beginning, the middle, and year end. Also, make sure you stick around to the end where I'm going to share a strategy that I would consider to be majorly impactful for many people that you might want to keep at top of mind throughout the entire year and when it might be relevant for you. If you've ever gone through the process of having a financial and retirement plan developed for you by a professional, or even if you've attempted it yourself, you might be aware of some of the factors that go into developing the preliminary structure. Identifying and understanding your goals surrounding you, your family, your career, and your plans to and through retirement are a great starting point. A question that I might ask in this initial fact-finding phase is fairly emotional, and that question is, if you had 6 to 12 months to live, and you were going to be entirely healthy and have the means to do whatever you wanted over that period of time, what would you do that you haven't already done? A follow-up to that might be something like, what type of legacy that you want to leave behind? Do you have children that you'd like to leave money to? Or maybe other relatives? Or even philanthropic causes? In some cases, some families that we work with might even say that they want to focus only on their lives and that nothing else matters as far as their legacy. From there, understanding what your expenses are, what your income might look like, where your income could come from, and even what your appetite for risk might be, are all factors that come into play. If you want, feel free to check out the expense analysis worksheet as well as the planning questionnaire that we actually use to guide families through this process. I've included links down below in the description. After your plan is developed and finalized, you'll more than likely move towards implementation. Each of these steps can build on each other over time, and in my opinion, helping you gain momentum and moving forward in the planning process is a great thing. Now comes the part where our team remains hyper-vigilant, as this is where we see most people fall off course, and that is the retirement planning review. Over the course of the year, typically depending on one's preferred method and timing of communication, we'll reach out to go over the retirement plans that we've implemented. I would definitely like to be very clear and reiterate there are a multitude of ways to go about these planning reviews, but for the purposes of today, I'm going to lay out the 10 elements that I think that you should consider incorporating in your reviews throughout the year. As you may know, the beginning of the year tends, more often than not, to bring optimism and motivation. Just like folks rushing to the gym after January 1st to try to set and achieve their goals, you might also have the early birds who've established their goals prior to the new year that are already in action. So, to give a brief breakdown and overview, through the course of the beginning of the year in the first few months, here's a couple things that we start to review. Number one, did we hit all the goals that we set out to hit? Did we, as a client and advisor team, make the changes that we said we wanted to make? And how was our execution? This tends to include things like savings goals, potentially investment returns, and maybe even shifts in portfolio allocation. Number two, aligning your team. Schedule a conversation early on in the year between your financial advisor and your accountant to plan for the year going forward. Hopefully, you've already done the planning for the current tax season in the year prior, but if not, you can also look at last-minute things to do. Number three, consider making any last-minute retirement plan contributions that can go towards your tax liability for the year prior. After April passes and tax season has calmed down for the most part, we enter the second phase of our planning, which includes elements 4, 5, and 6. And they go something like this. Number 4, benchmarking your cash flow and budgeting against the conversations that we've had, the planning that we have set out for in the beginning of the year, and then also in comparison to the historical projections and spending habits that we've seen from any particular family in the past. Number 5, insurance reviews to make sure all aspects of your risk management for your family are covered. And number 6, reviewing any contribution strategy or contribution cadence for accounts for your heirs, which may include either your children or your grandchildren. As a general idea, these conversations typically take place between May and August. Once school's in session, we know we're going towards the home stretch, And that's where we start to talk about the pillars number 7 through 10. And they go something like this. Number 7, reviewing your required minimum distributions, if applicable. Number 8, further aligning professionals in coordinating conversations with your financial advisor and your estate planning attorney to conduct estate planning reviews. Here, we will say, please ensure all of your beneficiaries are up to date at all times. Number 9, tax loss harvesting. Circling back to recommunicate with your accountant and your financial advisor to see if there are any opportunities to offset realized gains and realized losses in taxable investments. And pillar number 10, reviewing your retirement plan contributions that you've made throughout the year, again, if applicable, to ensure that you're doing as much as you can. As I stated in the beginning of this video, each of these concepts should be kept at top of mind anytime you're having a review of your retirement plan. But this gives you a basic outline of things you should think about and when they might be impactful throughout the year. In addition, as I said earlier, I want to share a strategy that I think could be meaningful and something to consider, and that is the Roth conversion. A Roth conversion involves moving assets from a pre-tax retirement account over to a Roth retirement account over time. Have you ever wondered if the investment strategy being implemented in your financial plan is the right one for you? Sure, your portfolio might move to the upside a bit when the market's doing well, and it might move lower when things aren't going so great. But how do you really know? Over the last 12 years, I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of families on their retirement plans, both to and through retirement. And over that time, something that's come up over and over again is shifting asset allocation. Hey everyone, Gabe Galanti here, fiduciary financial advisor, owner, and CEO at Rockline Wealth Management. And today, I'm going to talk about the 3 major stages of retirement planning, along with the mindset shifts that might occur, which also might call for shifts in allocation over time. And make sure you stick around to the end to hear the final phase, which might be the most important and is by far the most common in coming up in meetings with clients and prospects. Before I jump in and talk about each of these stages, to clarify for those of you who are not aware about asset allocation, broadly speaking, asset allocation refers to the mix of assets or investments within your portfolio. If you'd like to learn more specifically about asset allocation and your risk tolerance, please feel free to check out our risk tolerance calculator in the description below. Now, let's talk about these 3 major stages, along with the mindset shifts that come with each. The first major stage of retirement is something that many would refer to as the go-go years. In this beginning stage, some initially may not know how they want to go about spending all their time and their newly found freedom, although we do eventually see retirees following and pursuing their passions. During this time, most typically, we find that retirees have the most energy, are probably in the best health out of their retirement span, and have the biggest desire to go out and pursue their goals. In addition, spending the retirement assets down might be something new and kind of weird because you've spent your entire working life saving that money up. Major expenses typically include travel, hobbies, and major bucket list items. During this time, we see that asset allocation tends not to change too much in comparison to those years leading up to retirement for each particular retiree. Getting a real feel for potential streams of income, expenses, and volatility in the markets are a few of the things that we focus on during these go-go years. I personally feel that it takes at least a year for things to settle down and for retirees to feel comfortable in their new life. The next major stage I want to talk about is what many would know as the slow-go years. Here is where we typically see folks transitioning into their 70s and to and through their 80s, and although they might be more than able and willing to care for themselves, their active lifestyle might be slowing down a bit. This could be for a number of reasons. Maybe potentially to be near their children, or even to be close to be able to watch their grandchildren grow up. A couple of not so great reasons might be to potentially encountering health issues or a lack of mobility. Sometimes it might even be because you're completely satisfied and you've set out and accomplished everything that you wanted to. As far as expenses are concerned in this stage, we tend to see a decline in spending on more discretionary type items and spending increases on things surrounding healthcare. We also see many times families might begin to think about their estate planning, whether that includes gifting assets to the next generation or even more seriously pursuing philanthropy. If you're considering leaving money to the next generation, or maybe you don't even know where to start, check out our video in the description on leaving a legacy in retirement. During this time, only if we see that clients are comfortable with where they're at, we might begin to engage in the conversation of what they want their legacy to be and how they want it to play out. This actually sometimes can lead to a shift in asset allocation in which we might gear the monies more closely related to the time horizon and what's in the best interest of their heirs. It also might include an introduction to the next generation, in which case we start to involve their heirs in the planning meetings with their parents, and we speak about legacy going forward. Although this is a matter of preference, if leaving a legacy behind is important to you, thinking about asset allocation and changes over time is something to consider. The next major stage I want to talk about is known as the no-go years. Generally speaking, this stage starts in the late 80s and beyond. Retirees in many cases during this stage start to slow down a little more dramatically, and they might be encountering challenges with their health and moving around overall. During this time, retirees might be a little more dependent on their heirs, at-home care, or even assisted living facilities as far as getting around and being able to go about their day-to-day. Here, we tend to see a significant focus on convenience and comfort, as many of their goals have already been achieved at this point. At this point, many times we're experiencing a much more deepened relationship with the next generation, and our conversations tend to be more philosophical to ensure that one's wishes are carried out as they desire and that their legacy is preserved and carries on. Did you know, dating back to the 1950s, the stock market has experienced a correction of roughly 10% every 1.8 years? Today, I'm going to talk about a couple of financial strategies that you can implement that might be able to help you during a time of volatility. Hey everyone, I'm Gabe Galanti, fiduciary financial advisor, CEO, CCO, and owner of Rockline Wealth Management. Something I think many investors can agree on is that pullbacks in the stock market, whether it's just a little bit of choppiness, a correction of roughly 10% or more, or even an all-out crash, can bring nerve-wracking times. Although our own natural reaction during these times of volatility might be to freeze up or shy away from the situation, there's actually a multitude of strategies that you should consider. Now, if you're anything like me, you make it a point to keep up on your tax planning on a regular basis. Early on in my career, I realized that my excitement and joy that came along with making a profit on a couple of trades could end quickly at the end of the year if I had a large tax implication. Through personal experience and wisdom from a few mentors that I was lucky enough to learn from, I figured out pretty quickly that tax planning was paramount. And that brings me to my first point. During times of turbulence, something to consider is tax loss harvesting. This strategy is all about using investment losses to try to ease the burden of your tax bill. When the stock market drops, some of your investments might depreciate, and if you are able to realize losses, you can use those to pair realized gains on the year. You can even use up to $3,000 to offset income. Here's the benefit. You're effectively reducing your tax liability for the year while being able to reinvest those proceeds into other assets or even potentially the same asset after the wash sale period has occurred. Next up is something that I've implemented during multiple downturns and when putting into place can potentially have a serious impact. I remember very vividly during the market downturn in 2020 when asset prices dropped super dramatically. There were companies that once had what seemed like extremely high share prices drop almost instantaneously to a shadow of their former selves. What is one left to do in a situation like this? Consider my next strategy, a Roth conversion. The thought process here is that your traditional IRA or 401k may have dropped dramatically in value during the decline. However, you still own the same number of shares of your investments. When you convert to a Roth, you're paying tax on that lower value as opposed to paying tax on the higher value the investments once had. Over time, if the markets recover, all gains in the Roth will go tax-free. In addition, as you may know, withdrawals from a Roth account are typically tax-free in retirement as well, which could be another benefit to you. My third strategy reminds me of the legendary investor Warren Buffett. Buffett once said, with regards to investing, "When others are fearful, it's time to be greedy. And when others are greedy, it's time to be fearful." A quick personal story here, thinking back to the crash of 2020, I was working from home and I realized that there were certain businesses deemed essential, and those businesses were operating and growing pretty aggressively. One of those such businesses was Amazon, and it seemed like my neighborhood was flooded with Amazon boxes on a daily basis. I decided to use a portion of my cash reserves to buy additional shares of Amazon, which did go on to recover over the course of time. Strategy number 3 is to put your cash to work during times of volatility. When markets fall, stock prices may fall as well, which will give you the opportunity to jump in and purchase more shares with the same amount of cash. Strategy number 4 includes a component that's a bit more philosophical. I want you to think back to a time when you had first developed somewhat of a financial plan, either by yourself or by working with somebody else. More than likely, you went through a sequence of discussions to gain an understanding of where you're at, what your goals are, and how you're going to get there. After gaining this understanding of what you wanted and how you're going to get there, it was time to implement your strategy. Up to this point, things tend to go pretty smoothly. It's the consistent follow-up and dedication to staying on it thereafter where things might go awry. Your feelings might change, your goals might change, and your life might change over time. So it's imperative to stay up to date with what your goals are. With that, our fourth strategy is super important in saying, take a minute, pause, and reflect on what are your goals, what strategies do you have implemented, should you rebalance your portfolio, etc. A market downturn is a great time to see how balanced your portfolio actually is, in addition to seeing what your real feelings are about volatility. If you're concentrated in any one position or maybe too much in one sector, a market downturn could be a wake-up call to tell you, hey, you need to spread your assets across multiple different asset classes. Diversifying your portfolio may help you reduce risk over time, because when one asset class goes down, others could remain stable or even move upward. The last strategy I want to discuss may be the most impactful of them all. When we look at a client's financial plan, two of the most instrumental aspects that we review are the tax planning and the estate planning review. It's actually estimated that roughly $84 trillion is set to change hands to the next generation over the next 20 years, which makes estate planning reviews especially more significant. That being said, my final strategy is to consider gifting or transferring wealth during times of a market downturn, as the asset prices have theoretically declined in comparison to before the downturn took place. If the market rebounds, the growth of those assets will be in the beneficiary's hands, and you've transferred the assets at a potentially lower tax cost. Whether it's tax loss harvesting, dollar cost averaging, tax reviews, or estate planning reviews, these couple of strategies can help bring confidence to a time full of turbulence. As always, please consult with your financial professional, your tax professional, and your legal professional to assess which of these strategies, if any, might be right for you.